For the purpose of this video series, we will look at an artist, him, her, or themselves, as if they were a video game company, starting from their first foray in the medium to the album or project we are currently discussing. The album is the game, which is imagined from the production and musical constructs making up the production and mechanics of the game, and the lyrics which will tell the story in the abstract. With this in mind, who is Lupe Fiasco, the video game development company, and what is Lasers, the video game? Fiasco began his development journey during his teenage years, honing in on his craft by creating mods or remixing songs, and asset swapping or sampling and interpolating, as well as working on some original indie game ideas. A lot of Fiasco's early games, while being subjectively good, were not a representation of how he felt his brand should be seen. Stating that, we had a song about cocaine, guns, and women, and I would go to a record store and look at it and think, what are you doing? I felt like a hypocrite. I was acting like this rapper who would never be judged, and I had to destroy that guy. While this was the style of game that sold well at the time, Fiasco didn't believe that he should sell his creativity short for an easy paycheck and should create games that reflected him as a brand and as a person. He began to study other developers with a similar background, but managed to transform their brands in the direction where Fiasco had wanted his company to go, such as the development giants of Nas, known for his irreverent game It Was Written, and Jay-Z, who at the time was developing The Blueprint and had hailed from a somewhat of a golden age of gaming. In this new era of Lupe Fiasco game dev, he had gone back to his modding roots and created a mod for the Kanye West game Diamonds from Sierra Leone called Conflict Diamond, which paints a more vivid portrait of the atrocities that go into the diamond trade business in a less commercially viable game, though is a cult classic in its own right. Kanye West Softworks took note of this and had Fiasco come on to help with the development of Touch the Sky, bringing with him the storyboarding and character development skills that he had been polishing for some time. With this newfound following, the time was right for the fresh, cool young Lou to create a full-fledged game with the resources of parent company Atlantic Games, titled Lupe Fiasco's Food and Liquor. The title, in Lupe's own words, was a reference to the food and liquor stores common in Chicago. He explains, "The store is where everything is at. Food to me represents growth and progression. You eat food and you get strength. You need it to live. Liquor is not a necessity. It is a want. It destroys you. It breaks you down. I can see why it's prohibited in Islam. I've always felt like liquor represents the bad, the food represents the good, and everyone is made up of a little both." The game plays on that duality fantastically, but that's not what this video is about. The game was a commercial success and was beloved among players, and coming fresh off the heels of that success, production began on his second commercial game, The Cool, which I'm gonna break character here. This is one of the most fantastic albums of all time. It was the first album I heard of Lupe's, and it was just, every track on there is so good. Like, for real, go listen to that album. So obviously, The Cool, as with Food and Liquor, was loved by fans and critics alike, and during this time, Fiasco worked on some other passion projects with other creators such as Child Rebel Soldier with Pharrell Williams and Kanye West, and a new development group called Japanese Cartoon. It was during this time that Fiasco plunged into the production of his third commercial game and the topic of this video, Lasers. It was during the production of this game that Fiasco endured the brutality of working with a larger parent company, as many other development companies have in the past. While First and 15th, Fiasco's entertainment company, still had much of the creative control over this game, the usual problems that come with being commercially successful came down on him. The production was stifled from time to time. The game sat in a finished state for some time before being able to be released until fans had to petition for its release. It actually had sat in development hell for so long that Fiasco had enough time to create and finish his next game, Food and Liquor Part 2, The Great American Rap Game, the sequel to his first commercial game. Speaking about the game with the Chicago Times, Fiasco stated, "Lasers is a great album. I'm actually happy with the record. I feel I got to say what I wanted, even with it doesn't make up for what it took to get through it. It's still being argued and debated upon. The climate of this record was very weird. In some instances, surreal. I became very abstract. I had to create this commercial art that appeases the corporate side. I had to acquiesce to certain forces. Hopefully within that, I snuck in some things I actually wanted to say any way I can." Knowing the background of the development company, we can begin looking into Lasers, the game, and we'll start from a production standpoint. Lasers had the resources of any AAA title of the time, with very sought-after talent such as voice actors Trey Songz and Skylar Grey, had access to assets such as Modest Mouse's Float On, and in the same vein as It Was Written, features a long list of talented programmers. The graphics were superb and was evidence of not only how much love and attention was put into each aspect of this game from the developers and artists, but that Atlantic Games truly believed in the team's talent. That being said, it's also evident that Atlantic Games had more influence than they should have in the development process, which is not an uncommon practice by far. You have this team of people wanting to create something beautiful and something fun that they would enjoy themselves, but in an attempt to broaden the fan base and make the game more accessible to more people, they ostracize the core fans. I'm not saying Lasers does this, but it's obvious the parent company tried their hardest to make that happen. Fortunately, Lupe Fiasco is insanely talented and was able to turn those instances around. One such instance is the side quest Out of My Head, which is a very shoot-in, love-inspired quest about a character we the player don't know or care about, but the character is quite one-dimensional and is obviously not something the team wanted to put into the game, but Atlantic Games had to check boxes. There are also some rhythm mini-games like I Don't Want to Care Right Now and Coming Up, which I'm normally not personally a huge fan of, but Lupe and company managed to implement these mechanics in an engaging and nuanced way not common for the time. So that leads us to the burning question. What are the mechanics of this game? This part has a lot less of a one-for-one real-world comparison between music and games, so I will drop this bit for this section. The way I'm coming up with the mechanics for this is based on the actual instrumentation of the album. An example of this would be improvisational soloing in jazz music equating to something like timed puzzles or something of that nature. To start, I do believe this would be a single-player game with a handful of characters you meet along the way, which would be the features on the songs. The music for this album is great. There's obviously a lot of pop influence, which I'm not generally a huge fan of, but the deep saw synth sounds and syncopated broken chord progressions keep everything from going stale. The tempos are generally fast for a hip-hop album. The average BPM in rap is 85 to 95 beats per minute, while Lasers averages at around 104 BPM. And the number one single, The Show Goes On, has a BPM of 143. All this is amplified by the heavy drum tracks that contrast with the synth sounds by using live-sounding drum kits, especially in the way of the hi-hat. It's not common for hi-hat to be live in hip-hop, and it's something I really enjoy hearing. The key signatures on the tracks are primarily in a minor key, which isn't uncommon in pop and hip-hop, but still helps explain the game. Minor keys are inherently more melancholic than their major counterparts, and specifically D minor is noted as historically the saddest of the minor keys, which is the key signature of the final song on the non-deluxe version of the album, which we'll get into more when discussing the story. But this production style of being a bit pop-inspired and synth-heavy mixed with the rawness of Lupe's vocals and the realistic drum sounds, I would say graphically we're looking at a stylized 3D game, something akin to Borderlands or the Dragon Ball Z games from a third-person perspective. I would say the color palette is more muted than those, with more earth tones and less of the highly vibrant colors used that are reminiscent of the anime and comic book styles that they are based on. I do want to say all of this is subjective, and I'd love to see what people think in the comments. This is just kind of my opinion. I don't necessarily think this would be an open world in the same way of something like Skyrim, but more of a like quasi-open world where there's plenty to explore, but you remain in certain areas. Sort of like the missions in Rockstar games where there's like still a world around you, but you are confined to completing quests in certain play areas. I guess kind of similar to like Dishonored, where you can move around wherever you want, but the play area isn't necessarily large. It's just like a very well-crafted specific area. With the quicker pacing of the music, I think that would play a role in the action of the game. With the fast-paced action like the newest Doom game, mixed in with like how I think that the developers wanted For Honor to be. Like, I know it ended up being like kind of lackluster, but the idea of it with like parrying and whatnot was actually pretty cool. I also know that Lupe Fiasco has an affinity for the Street Fighter games, and I think it could seamlessly transition into that throughout, especially in the instance of like a boss battle. Between having the resources of AAA backing as well as the passion and experience behind Fiasco, there would be no problem implementing a system like this. The combat, I think, would be a mix of unarmed firearms and melee weapons, similar to like the Fallout series, but again, a third-person game I think would work best for this, and definitely a bigger focus on making the combat more engaging. I also see a lot of sci-fi elements playing a large role in this, specifically involving lasers and some futuresque tech, as the entire album has a bit of a future vibe to it. That being said, there's still a ton grounded in reality and current tech. The song Till I Get There is mainly just a piano and drums. Show Goes On uses the guitar sample from Float On, as well as this beautiful horn and string arrangement that completely flips the song it samples into being more empowering. It's a truly beautiful piece and deserves to be the breakout single, which is rare. Another song that shies away from the sci-fi elements is All Black Everything, with the underlying vocals and string arrangement being the basis for the song. I think the sci-fi elements could show through, not just in the tech, but in a similar way to Prototype, Prey, or even like Dishonored or Bioshock, where it almost plays as a magic system. The player's laser powers could have branching skill trees depending on how you use your lasers. They could help you traverse areas that you couldn't normally, or you could make projections of yourself to disorient your opponents. There's a world of opportunities that could come from that concept. So we have this sick sci-fi third-person shooter set in an open world with a branching skill tree, fighting mechanics, and a magical laser system with stylized cel-shaded 3D graphics. That's cool and all, but what's the story? For me, that's easy. It's a dystopian future reminiscent to George Orwell's 1984. I know when most people hear 1984, they think of Big Brother, which is a large part of it, but the part that stands out to me is the concept of doublethink, which according to Wikipedia is a process of indoctrination in which subjects are expected to simultaneously accept two conflicting beliefs as truth, often at odds with their own memory or sense of reality. A concept that was created by Orwell, but later inspired a term known as doublespeak, which is actually a common practice to keep the public under impression that things aren't what they seem. Some examples of this being used are as follows. Euphemisms like servicing the target, force packages, difficult exercise in labor relations, and meaningful downturn in aggregate output. Throughout Lasers, that theme is prevalent, and I would argue it is what the entirety of Till I Get There is about. The entire song, Lupe is coping with this newfound fame colliding with his upbringing and morals, and throughout the song, people are pushing him to bolster his image and make them more money. It's honestly a heartbreaking song, especially the line, "Instead of green jello and maybe chicken soup, they fed me magazine covers and video shoots." And the chorus just basically says that hopefully things will get better when I get to the undefinable there, without ever expressing where or what there truly is. The show goes on is amidst a turning point in the game where everything seems to be going right for the player. The song is a lot more upbeat, and Lupe is just saying that this oppressive regime holds no power over him. He's in a safe zone at this point. He has amassed a bit of a following and is taking the fight to the regime. One thing important to note with this track is the juxtaposition to its original sample. I know it's easy to say that the producer disliked the track and wanted to use it, which very well could be the case, but Fiasco so perfectly mirrors the concepts explored in the original song, I don't think it can really be ignored. As I had said previously in Lupe's song, he's feeling cocky. He kicks his feet up on their desk. He is treated like a slave but just laughs it off. And the interpolation of the original chorus says roughly the same thing, but in Lupe's, it's a lot more of a belief and confidence that everything will end up all right. In the Modest Mouse song, Isaac Brock, the singer, talks about problems that end up okay in a lot of the same ways Lupe does, but Brock is a lot more concerned in each instance. I ran my mouth off a bit too much. Oh, what did I say? Well, you just laughed it off, it was all okay. And even in the chorus, where he is saying that we'll all float on, his voice is shaky and unsure. Our protagonist at this point in the game is at a false high point that will soon be brought back into reality. Maybe he had gotten sidetracked from the main goal, or maybe things just seem like they're going his way, but are about to take a turn for the worse. All Black Everything is another song that Lupe is pouring his heart out while trying to remain an unfeeling narrator. In it, he speaks of a dream he had where to be of a skin color that's different from someone else's has no context. It's an interesting and unexplored concept in hip-hop. Generally, if someone is wanting to uplift the Black community, the song will be one of Black excellence or Black empowerment. However, Lupe's approach is quite unique. He says that he had this dream that none of it had mattered at all, that W.E.B. Du Bois, a prolific author and civil rights activist, had written the U.S. Constitution. That conscious hip-hop, rap that focuses mainly on the problems facing the everyday of poverty-stricken people from a socio-political standpoint, isn't its own subgenre, and specifically that everybody's rapping like crack never happened. In essence, that Black culture wasn't better or worse than white culture, but that both were equally American culture. So our protagonist is someone who is witnessing this oppressive regime and dreams of there to be equality and truth. But who are they? Why is this person seeing this world, and why are they the ones to do something about it? I think that comes from the first line spoken in the entire album on the song Letting Go. Lupe states, "My self-portrait shows a man that the wealth tortured." In reality, this is most likely a reference to the creation of this album and his tenure with Atlantic Records, as they just wanted him to put out some radio-friendly records and not cause problems, not allowing him to be the artist that he was. However, in the world of this game, it shows our protagonist witnessing these atrocities firsthand. It could be taken that he had a specific run-in with those in power that had led him to this fight for justice, similar to the protagonist of Akira or Prototype, which would also give him the power of lasers. But something important to this whole concept I've left out is that lasers is an acronym for love always shines every time, remember to smile, which is further built upon in that same intro song when he says, I can see the lasers shooting out of you and me. He sees this innate goodness in people, their lasers, which couldn't be part of some bizarre government experiment, but would have to be within certain people. With this, I believe that the wealth that had tortured our protagonist was his own. He was a part of this regime in some way prior to the events of the game. I could see this playing out in a similar fashion to Fable 3, where he knew things weren't great, but had been left mostly in the dark about how bad things truly were, and when he was exposed to the truth, he had to escape and fight back. In this instance, the lasers still could be a result of some shady government or corporate interference, but has become somewhat prevalent in society amongst the good. This concept is also backed up in the song Words I Never Said, which is all about those ignoring the issues being as problematic as those who are perpetrating the injustices. Quote, I think that all the silence is worse than all the violence. Fear is such a weak emotion, that's why I despise it. But in the chorus of the song, he places the blame on himself by stating, I can't take back the words I never said. State-Run Radio is also a song with a great indication as to what the world he is living in consists of and reestablishes the ideas of doublespeak and doublethink, telling people that the military needs more money so they can continue to keep the population poor and to continue to not look towards a brighter future. So where does this all lead? Where does our protagonist wind up at the end of this gripping game? Well, the last song on the non-deluxe version of this album is A Tale of Loss. I don't want to dive into the lyrics too much on this because this video is for entertainment purposes and I don't want to use someone's passing for that purpose. So with that, we'll go back to looking at it from a musical standpoint. Like I had said previously, the last song is in D minor, which is notably the saddest sounding of all minor keys. I'm not sure why, but it just sounds more sad, and removing the lyrics, we're left with an ambiguous, melancholic ending. Did we defeat the evil regime? It's not apparent. I like to imagine there's a large final battle between an uprising of laser users and the oppressive forces, leading to large losses on both sides, and then the screen fades to white. The credits roll as we listen to a piano playing the song I'll Never Forget You, which is the last song. And when you think it's over, you remember that this is a deluxe album and had more songs. There's an after credits scene that draws from the song I'm Beaming, which literally just means I'm shining brightly. I like to believe the protagonist became ethereal, or ethereal, I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, and led the oppressed to victory and they rebuild a better future. Some decide to leave and find a better world. Maybe try to help others and teach and learn from them, or as Lupe put it in the song, it's kids who want to leave and I encourage them. Go out and see the world, never return from, yeah, you don't come back unless you've learned some. Well, if you think Lasers sounds like a cool game, like this video. If you want to hear some more stories like this or want to see some development stuff, go ahead and subscribe. And yeah, comment down below. I really do want to hear what other people think. And, bye.